This is Green Street, the Environmental Health Show, greenstreetnews.org. Patti and Doug Wood, welcome back. What's happening to our kids and our families in this digital age? How is digital technology, and particularly the addictive nature of technology, not to mention the efforts of big companies to make their product addictive, impacting our kids, our families, our communities, and our society at large? This is not an idle question. The impact of digital technology on our society is going to have repercussions for generations. So it's important that we are clear-eyed and sober about what is happening to us right now. Today on Green Street, Patti and I are going to put aside our usual focus on toxins in the air and the water and the food supply that can impact our health, and we're going to talk about the impact of our digitally addicted society with psychologist Dr. Betsy Stone. It's a fascinating discussion, and we hope gives all of us some ideas of how we can move our society forward in a more positive way. So stay tuned for that, but first, some of the headlines of the week. Patti, what have you got for us?
Okay, well, this is something from The Guardian, one of our favorite sources.
Yeah.
Their article is about the Trump administration, which is planning to loosen a federal rule that requires grocery stores and air conditioning companies to reduce greenhouse gases used in cooling equipment in what officials say is a push to lower the cost of groceries.
I thought we had a law about refrigerant
Yes,
chemicals.
we do,
right?
a really
Didn't we
good...
solve this problem with the Montreal
Nope,
Protocol?
we're going to use this. We're going to keep cutting back on all of these regulations that are protecting the planet and ourselves to say that we're going to lower the cost of groceries by doing that.
Whatever it takes, I guess. Huh?
That's right.
Yeah.
So
right.
Lee Zeldin, head of the EPA, said that the Biden-era rule imposes costly restrictions that limit the type of refrigerants U.S. businesses and families can use.
For good reason.
Zeldin says the new rule will, quote, allow businesses to choose the refrigeration systems that work best for them, saving them billions of dollars. This will be felt directly by American families and lower grocery prices.
So they can use any polluting refrigerant they want now.
That's correct, because it's going to lower grocery prices. With voter concerns over the cost of living growing before pivotal elections in November, Republicans are scrambling to address affordability issues. It is not clear how much or how quickly the loosening of the refrigerant rule might ease grocery prices.
Yeah, I was going to say, how big a deal is this?
That's right.
You know.
The administration's action on refrigerants represents a reversal after Trump signed a law in his first term that aimed to reduce harmful planet-warming pollutants emitted by refrigerators and air conditioners. The 2020 law reflected a broad bipartisan consensus on the need to quickly phase out domestic use of hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, that are thousands of times more potent than carbon dioxide and are considered a major driver of global warming. But this is my favorite quote from Lee Zeldin.
Okay.
The plan to ease restrictions is part of a series of sweeping environmental changes that Zeldin said, quote, put a dagger through the heart of climate change religion, end quote.
Climate change religion.
That's climate change
That's
religion.
That's the way they think about it.
It's a hoax, according to Trump.
I forgot.
You forgot.
Yeah.
Climate change is a hoax.
All right, what else you got?
Well, here's an op-ed by Josh Berman of the Sierra Club and Eric Walker of We Act, two organizations fighting to keep New York's groundbreaking climate law in place.
Yeah, good for them. All
Yep.
right, cool.
New York Governor Kathy Hochul says she is trying to tailor New York climate law to reality, but the changes she continues to seek go far beyond pragmatic tinkering. The governor's proposal is a wholesale evisceration of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. What's more, it doesn't address the real problems New Yorkers are facing, the equivalent of treating a broken pinky by amputating the entire arm.
Oh, man.
The Climate Action Council's 2022 scoping plan included hundreds of important recommended regulatory actions that the state was directed to take by January 1, 2024.
Yeah, there were all these things they were going to do. I mean,
Right.
we're going to do this and this and this and this and this.
And they would help achieve the law's mandates. Our groups, meaning Sierra Club and We Act, watched as the scoping plan's numerous recommendations were whittled down to just one program, Cap and Invest, and the January 1st deadline slipped past. We then watched as the governor abandoned even this one program. With virtually nothing left to accelerate climate progress in New York, we reluctantly took the state to court as a last resort. Unsurprisingly, given the governor's abdication of her responsibility to faithfully implement the law, we won.
I was going to say, they won this
They
lawsuit.
did win this.
You know, this idea that we can't meet our climate goals because it's too expensive.
This is crazy.
This is an existential issue, folks.
Yeah.
You know, the idea that
and the alternatives that she's proposing are far more expensive.
I don't understand this. It all has to do with economics, not understanding what the future cost is going to be if you don't take action now.
That's right. The governor could have responded to our multiple attempts to discuss a settlement of the case, but instead she appealed the court ruling and began building a public case for gutting the law, built on unrealistic cost projections intended to spark fear. The irony of her position is this. With fossil fuel prices skyrocketing and New Yorkers struggling to pay their utility bills and fill up their cars, implementing a program that raises revenue to help New Yorkers reduce their dependence on gas and oil would promote affordability, not hinder it.
Yeah.
The people who lose if the governor succeeds are the South Bronx children with asthma living next to highways, the Buffalo residents who watched energy bills spike during last winter's cold snaps and today's foreign wars, and the Long Island homeowners stuck on expensive delivered fuels like propane.
Yeah, it's actually going to be everybody across the country because the law was a model law.
That's right.
It really
That's right.
was kind of set the stage for other states to really adopt, you know,
a similar law.
Yeah.
It was a blueprint.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our groups went to court because helping move New York off fossil fuels is critical for our wallets, our health, and our future. The governor still has a chance to make a better reality for New Yorkers. Advance the CLCPA. Don't dismantle it. And that's their take on this, and it's really good.
Yeah. All right, we'll be right back.
What does it mean to be human? What really separates us from thinking machines? As thinking machines become more sophisticated, and as we begin to rely on them for more and more of our daily activities, the skills that have made us who we are beginning to disappear. The ability to talk with each other, learn from each other, think critically about important issues, and develop fully as humans are being slowly, incrementally, and almost imperceptibly lost.
Dr. Betsy Stone is a psychologist, author, and public speaker whose passion for wellness in the lives of families has brought her invitations to speak throughout North America and Europe. We're excited to welcome Dr. Stone to Green Street to talk about what's happening to our children and our families and what the future holds for all of us if we continue down the current path. Here's our conversation with Dr. Betsy Stone.
There are a number of things that we see both in data and anecdotally that are actually very important. There are generational differences. Now, I'm not talking necessarily about technological differences, but generational differences in the ways people behave. For example, most boomers were raised their children with dinner time.
Sure.
A shared dinner time is something which has really gone out the window. We see much less of it. That's not to say we don't see any of it. And for lots of families, there are particular meals, whether it's dinner or a Sunday lunch, that are sacrosanct and that people still spend time at. But the kind of routine sitting together at meals is something that has shifted. And I think that even in the moments where we sit together at meals, oftentimes we have machines with us. When I first started working as a therapist, I'm a retired psychologist, one of the things we talked about was televisions that were on at dinner. Well, televisions on at dinner are so much less intrusive than phones on at dinner.
Well, everybody's watching the same thing, for one thing.
Yes, absolutely.
You know.
And there are commercials where you could actually talk about things.
Sure.
Or say, pass the peas, please.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's all sorts of rituals around food, which have historically been connection rituals. And that has really diminished. So we see fewer connection rituals around predictable behaviors that people engage in on a daily basis. Food is one of them. Another one is time in the car. That it used to be you would get in the car and maybe you would put music on, but people didn't have things to do. And so there's been this shift from cars being almost enforced community time, connection time, to cars being more times that we are more isolated. There are ways in which we believe that social media and connections over the internet are real. Sometimes they are real connections. Surely for us during COVID, they were the only connections most of us had during lockdown.
Yeah.
And they were invaluable. However, what we don't see is kind of routine skill building that happens around particularly meals and cars. And what's the skill building that happens there? I have to learn how to listen to you. I have to learn how to ask you questions, whether it is please pass the peas or what happened at school today. I have to learn listening skills. And I have to begin to think about myself as part of a community as opposed to an individual. One of the things that happens at meal times, for example, is that we think about how much food there is and who needs what. Mm-hmm. And if I eat at 6 o'clock and you eat at 6:15 and Patty, you eat at 6:30, what we're not having is this exchange that has to do with knowing each other better, learning how to share, all sorts of things. And one of the things that we see as a result of that, I think, directly and indirectly, is that kids get to college, for example, and they don't know how to meet people because they don't have how to sit with strangers skills. Uh-huh. So that's a way in which we see technology impacting us directly. I always want to think also about what soft skills people lost during the pandemic, that they didn't develop during the pandemic, or that they actually regressed with during the pandemic. And I'll give you an example of this. If you were in lockdown in 6th grade, which in most of this country is a time where you move into middle school, mm-hmm. What didn't you learn how to do? You didn't learn how, these are things 6th grade teachers teach and 8th grade teachers don't know how to teach. You didn't learn how to walk in the hall. That's actually an incredibly important skill. How do I walk down a hallway and navigate through other people? How do I walk with my friends? How do I avoid the people I don't like? How do I make sure that I have time to get to my locker if I need to get to my locker? These are self-regulation skills. Mm-hmm. How do I walk into a lunchroom? In 5th grade, you sit with the kids in your class. In 6th grade, you sit with the kids you choose. Yeah. How do I walk into a lunchroom and know where to sit? Again, these are developmental soft skills that if we don't teach them, kids don't have them. How do I navigate the fact that I went from having 1 or 2 teachers to having 5 or 6 teachers? Some of whom I like, some of whom over-assign homework, most of whom don't talk to each other about what different kids need. And so how do I develop these skills when I don't have the social or educational supports to do them?
So this is all falling on parents then to make up the deficit, right? I mean, parents need to help their kids navigate. And is that happening, or do you see that not happening?
I don't see that happening. I wouldn't blame parents. Mm-hmm. I don't think that parents have this skill set either, particularly around soft skills. We don't tend to focus on them. Like, we pay attention to you're behind in algebra, right. But we are much less likely to pay attention to you're behind in friend, unless we're panicking. I don't think it falls only on parents, Doug. I actually think it's a social problem. I wouldn't want to say that parents are responsible for all of this. I think that we need to develop skills of failure. Learning how to fail is an incredibly important skill. Learning how to be unhappy and manage myself is an incredibly important skill. And lots of our parents are just saying to their children, all I want is for you to be happy.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
Which I would argue, Patty, is a lie.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, but that's what they say.
Yes.
That's what they say, and they feel really good about it. The only thing that I want is for you to be happy.
Right. It's clearly not true.
Right.
Because if all I wanted was for you to be happy, you would not have to go to school on days you don't want to, and you could eat red licorice for breakfast, and you would never have to put your clothes away, and.
Right.
And you wouldn't have to listen to me.
Right.
But it sets up, I think, a sense that if a child is unhappy, they are not only unhappy, but they are unhappy and have failed their parents. Mm. I would not say that all I wanted was for my children to be happy. I wanted my children to be moral people. I wanted them to be responsible people. I wanted them to be people I would like when they grew up. I wanted them to make safe choices some of the time. Safe enough choices is really what I mean.
Right.
And I wanted them to know that when they messed up, that A, I would be there, and B, they could manage.
Right. I used always to say to my kids, maybe this is wrong, but I used to say the most important thing in the world is for you to be a good person.
Yep.
And let's work on those things. I mean, I didn't say let's work on those things, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but just being a good person, being a moral person, being an ethical person, being, those things, being part of a society, a giving part of society.
So, Patti, I would argue that to be a moral person, you have to be capable of moral struggle, which means you have to be able to ask questions that don't have good answers.
Yeah.
Like what?
Every one of the examples that we use to see if somebody's a conscientious objector. Conscientious objection is a moral stand, and they ask you to pick between impossible situations.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How do we teach children how to think deeply? Well, that's one of the things that lots of families used to do at dinner.
Right. And I get to the meat of, what we're trying to get to here. And that is, it just all seemed like, it was kids at the dinner table who were all looking at it. But it's actually parents who are as addicted to their wireless devices as their children are.
Absolutely.
I mean, we see parents pick up their kids at the bus stop. The kids, are, hauling home their art project and their violin and whatever. And the mother is just like on her phone the whole
Right.
time. She has never even asked, how was your day today? How was your project, received? Or, how was orchestra practice? Or,
Right.
da. Nothing
So
goes on.
what is that kid learning about social skills?
Nothing.
Yeah.
No, that's not true. We never don't learn.
No.
Okay. Learning something. But what are you learning?
You're learning that this is more interesting than you are.
Yeah. Yeah. We're talking to a professor at Harvard about this, and she was telling me she'd done some research, and she was told by, I guess the parent told her that the child threw the phone in the toilet. The child was so upset that the mom wasn't paying attention that they literally took the phone and threw it in the toilet. That was that was how they solved the problem.
Right. That's pretty clear.
Yeah.
In terms of the kind of way we develop, one of my kids is a high school teacher. And she says to kids who are using Chat, GPT, or other forms of AI to write papers, and that's happening with, all over the place.
Of course.
She says to the kids that she catches, because it's pretty easy to catch them, that when they get in the workforce, they're not going to be competing with Chat GPT. They're going to be competing with other people who have original thoughts. And if they don't develop the skills to have original thoughts, if all they're learning how to do is to manage AI will self-manage. So her position, and I think she's right, is if you don't learn how to think, then you don't know how to think. And the thing that makes human beings unique is our ability to put disparate things together. For Benjamin Franklin to put a key on a kite is a wacky thing. I don't think ChatGPT would have come up with that. Learning how to think is not natural for human beings. Thinking about I'm hungry is natural, but thinking really meaningful, deep thoughts is something we have to learn how to do, and it gets reinforced. Having said that, I'm going to say that there is really lovely data that says that toddlers and teenagers in particular ask tons of deep spiritual questions, toddlers and adolescents, and that we tend to answer those questions very flippantly. I don't know of an adolescent who doesn't ask at some level, why do people do bad things? That's an incredibly important question that when we have a flippant response to, closes down an avenue of interest. The other two times in our lives that we see people being really struggling with spiritual and moral questions is in response to illness or tragedy and as we approach death. So human beings are capable and inclined to ask big questions. And our experience of it is often that we get shut down. Mm-hmm. Those big questions are a gift that kids give to adults.
Yeah.
So my son, who is now in his mid-30s, when he was 2.5, said, we're in the car, I peel a clementine, I hand it back to him. He says, Mama, where did clementines come from? I said, trees? And he said, no, that's not what I meant. And I said, the grocery store? And he said, no, they don't have seeds. Where did they come from? That's a magical opportunity. But if I'm on my phone, or if he's on his phone, not when he's 2, and has that thought and says to himself, I'm going to look that up. The social impact of it is gone. The thinking impact of it is gone. We have to come up with opportunities for families to explore thoughts together.
And how do we do that in the digital age, which is here to stay, by the way? It's absolutely here to stay. And
Absolutely.
it's only going to get, I hate to say it's only going to get worse, but.
Look, it has had great advantages for us. I would not have wanted to go through COVID without this ability.
Yeah.
Right.
We have to understand that parenting is really important and really boring. And so we have to figure out ways to support parents. You know, one of the interesting things I think about parenting toddlers is that we have naturally occurring communities that exist, whether it's the preschool parents or the neighborhood parents. There are communities that just spring up of parents. Once you get to elementary school, that starts to diminish, and then it plummets in middle and high school. There aren't communities of parents who support parents in healthy ways. We have to build communities of parents with intentional and structure. So there's a story I read about a small town in maybe Vermont, someplace in New England, I have Vermont in my head, where maybe 5th or 6th grader was asking her mom for a phone. And the mom really didn't want to give it to her. And so what the mom did was she contacted all of this kid's friends, parents, and said, let's all get landlines. Well, what does a landline give you? It gives you a way to talk to people, not to play games with people, not to play games with yourself, but to actually have real conversations. And there's a landline, and when the phone rings, Johnny, and you pick up the phone, Johnny says, hi, Ms. Wood, this is Johnny. Can I please speak with Kevin? And they're learning all sorts of skills there.
Yeah.
And Ms. Wood is going to say, Johnny, it is so nice to hear from you. How's your mom? These are all skill development. I think we have to be thinking about things we expect them to be able to do, and then we have to teach them how to do it.
How about writing script?
Yeah. If we think it matters, then we should be figuring out ways to make it happen.
Let me ask you this. A couple of years ago, we put together an international declaration on the rights of children in the digital age. This was together with a Harvard lawyer friend of mine out in California. And one of the things that we said was children have a right to be free from the pernicious effect of digital technology, basically, is what we were saying. It's not fair that we burden our kids with this unbelievably addictive technology to which they are not ready in any way to manage the addictiveness of this. And of course,
neither are we.
I was going to say parents aren't helping. So is that
Except that I don't have a phone.
Are we just whistling in the wind, or could we get there somehow? And if so, how?
It is very hard to say what we shouldn't have. I think it's as important to say what we should have. Children should have lengthy periods of recess. Children should have the opportunity for neighborhood play. My guess is that both of you grew up with neighborhood play, and most likely your children did not.
Our children did.
Our children did. We made sure.
Yeah.
Okay, there is very little neighborhood play because kids are so scheduled. First of all, you have to not schedule your kid, and then you have to be in a place where other people aren't scheduling their kids. I think that one of the things that happens in neighborhood play is both I play with people I don't like, and I play with people who are very different ages than I am. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So if you're 7 and there's a 4-year-old playing outside, And it's not your brother or sister. You have to pay attention to that 4-year-old. And if you're 11 and there's a 7-year-old playing out with you outside, you have to teach that 7-year-old not just how to hit a ball off a tee, but how to hit a ball if I toss it to you. Mm-hmm. These are really different skills that lots of our kids are either not getting or they're getting from coaches.
From organized, athletics,
Sports, yeah.
right?
From adults. They're not
only from adults, right?
Right. What happens when I have neighborhood play is that I have to learn how to play with the kid who's a jerk because she's in my neighborhood.
Right.
Which means I have to build up a lot of tolerance. I have to build up a lot of social skills so that I can manage her. There's a lot of management in dealing with people who are jerks.
Mm.
So what do you think is going to be the result of this as these children who have grown up in this digital age with a phone in their pocket from the time they're in 4th or 5th grade? What's going to happen when they are young adults and then become responsible parents and so on? What do you see happening?
So I think that we're already seeing some of the impacts. I think a lot of kids don't want to grow up. We have seen an increase in the number of kids who go away to college, come home for Thanksgiving and say, I'm not going back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because they're really not ready to leave home. I think part of our job as parents is to liberate our children from us.
Sure.
And we're seeing kids who don't want to be freed from their parents. Later marriages, later children, fewer children. So is it that they don't feel that they're equipped? I think we have a generation of young adults who are relatively insecure and not as confident as previous generations have been.
Understandably, because they're not equipped. They don't have the tools. They didn't develop those skills. Going back to what you first talked about, they didn't develop those skills as they went along. Now,
Right.
all of a sudden, they're 20 and they don't have those skills. And they're going to a job interview or they're meeting with colleagues for the first time. They don't know what to do. So you walk into a conference room now and everybody is on their phones because that's what they're familiar with. That's comfort to them. And they don't know how to talk to the person that's next to them. It just doesn't.
Absolutely.
So, Betsy, when you wake up in the morning, are you optimistic about the future? It's a question I pose to most of our guests. I'm curious to know what you think.
I'm really afraid of the sense I have in the whole world that I'm the only one that matters, and that if you're in my way, I should just get rid of you. I'm really afraid of the devaluing of the human spirit in lieu of money. And I believe that human beings can persist, and that if we are willing to do the work of persistence, our job in the world is to improve the world. And so I want to think that I live my life with the understanding that I have a moral obligation to leave things better than I found them.
Dr. Betsy Stone, psychologist, author, and public speaker, talking about how digital technology is changing us as humans and what we can do about it. You can learn more about Betsy at her website, betsystonphd.com. And don't forget our new YouTube channel with dozens of our past shows at Green Street with Patti and Doug Wood. That's going to do it for our show today. Special thanks to Dr. Betsy Stone and all of you who listen to and support the show. Thanks for listening.